I'm Jim Morris. I'm the founder of the Product Discovery Group. I started my career in Silicon Valley startups, and I've gravitated into leadership and product management. And now I coach leaders and teams in startups and large enterprises in product discovery and in digital transformation. Yesterday, I led a workshop about building better prototypes and user testing. Who's there? There we go, yay.
All right.
And I teach a class at UC Berkeley, and I'm crazy enough to be writing a book about user testing, so look for that so that I can help everybody become extraordinary at testing new ideas with users. So with that, let's introduce our panel. I've got Rima Campbell here. She's was the VP of UX Research Partner for UserZoom before the user testing merge, and now is the VP of Experience Research and Strategy at User Testing. Before this, she was at Citi for 16 years, where she built the Global User Research Center of Excellence from the ground up. Her last role at Citi was the SVP of User Experience and FinTech, so give it a hand for Rima. Oh, good. You're all in order of my sheet here. Ryan Leffel is the head of design at Priceline. Has held multiple roles, including one at Yahoo, as well as at an agency, RGA, as the Interaction Design Director. What drives Ryan most is his learnings from taking a career entrepreneurial pivot and running his own business, and it still shapes the way he works today. That's making startups, your own business is very hard. Ryan's also the UXDX New York ambassador, so we're here in his home ground. So applause for Ryan, thank you. And then we have Fahad Osmani, who's recently taken on the role as VP of Product Design at Capital One. Prior to that, he was at Splunk as head of design, which as a former engineer, I'm a big fan of log analysis, and was over 8 years at IBM, where he held positions including Director of Design, Data, and AI Applications. So hand for Fahad. So let's get a sense of you, the audience. How many of you would self-describe as a designer? Awesome. How many of you would self-describe as a user researcher? Okay, how about a product manager? Okay, excellent. How about an engineer? Any engineers in the audience? All right, those are my people. That's fantastic. What about managers or executives? Okay, great, welcome. Any other roles? I didn't want to leave you out, but we'll just be other. Design ops. There we go. HR, fantastic. I love it. Now, to switch tone here, how many folks here, this is sort of getting to the heart of the panel, are losing executive backing or have had recent problems winning executive backing for design-led activities? Anybody here? Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a tough time. So this panel is going to help you think about ways that you can elevate design and research and other design-led activities and at your company and greenlight the resources you need to make impactful products. So you can submit questions to the barcode, so we'll check those in a couple minutes. So please check that out, and let's start off the panel. The first question is, what is happening with user research and design-led growth at companies today? So I'm going to have Rima kind of take that question, and we'll go from there.
Sure, I'll give it a try. I think right now every company is trying to become a software company. And what's happening, some companies don't know how to act like a software company. They got too big, too many processes. And to be honest, we all know that more than 50% of code is going to waste because it's not meeting users' needs. It's not built based on user needs and market opportunities. So we also know, based on a lot of analysis that McKinsey has done, that there is, statistically speaking, companies who know how to be a software company, and they are the digital leaders in the industry, as we all know, without mentioning who they are, Apple and Sony and others. But also there are the minority. They represent 20% of those companies. The other 80% are the ones who's struggling, and they're trying to act like a software company. So what's happening really now is that they're trying to restructure. They're trying to reorg because all their product and project are differently building that code and is going to waste. So they're trying to restructure, they're trying to reorg, and figuring out how to build better product and with efficiency and with speed to market. And with that, naturally, UX research is getting cut. Budget for UX research is getting cut. Not all companies, but some companies. So that's what I'm seeing, and I believe the reason behind that is UX researchers or UXers are not becoming business partners to executives. They're not speaking the executive language. They're not tying their work to the business KPIs.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. What, as we think about this perception with executives, what is a way we can kind of change that perception about UX research and design-led activities you mentioned?
Well, I'll sort of dial back a little bit. In my past experience, it's, mostly my time in design leadership has spanned about 4 different companies. So it's a select group. I'm talking anecdote rather than kind of anything systemic over here. But I feel like we started with this point where design thinking, design-led growth used to be a kind of if you build it, they will come type ethos at the company. And now what I'm hearing a lot more of is the sort of product-led growth, sales-led growth, user-led growth. And so pivoting to those outcomes and understanding what the metrics for success are, like how do you define the problem with numbers? How do you define the success state, again, with numbers? Getting involved in that conversation, shaping the problem statement, shaping the end success state is a much, much more, in my experience, successful way to be in the conversation and shape design-led outcomes, as we used to call them before, as opposed to following the field of dreams approach of if you just follow the design-led approach, then good outcomes will happen. So I'm finding that a lot more engagement in, as you said, the metrics and the defining the states of the problem. What's the burning platform? What's the good thing you'll get at the end of it if you choose to engage in the solution? That's turning up a lot more success. And success doesn't necessarily mean adding to your budget or adding to your headcount. It just means producing that outcome.
Successful products.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to add to that?
No, I think these are all really good points. I mean, one thing I would add is I think there's also generally this idea of let's just educate and talk about it. And I think actually being able to show the value is really the best way to sell something through and make a difference. And I think nowadays it's really forgetting about what you know and thinking about how you could be more creative in your process to get things done quicker.
For the audience, the majority of you said, hey, I'm a designer. How many of you have access to data and analytics at your fingertips? That's great. How many of you use it like once a month? Okay, how about once a week? All right, that's great. I mean, I think this is what we're getting at here is this perception of attaching our activities to the success of the business and how can we connect those dots. So yeah. But there is another side to this. Companies that are fully into optimization that really are maybe over-indexing on quantitative. And so, is there a story about maybe being too reliant on quantitative data, where quantitative's coming in and maybe stepping on all of the other research that we know about? Any stories in this area?
I think it's something that certainly exists at a lot of companies. It's, I think, in some ways easier to be dependent on quantitative. It's data and it's numbers. I think one of the problems that comes out of that is it could be easy for people, I'm speaking generally here, but it could be easy to look at numbers that come back from an experiment and make a hypothesis about what those numbers mean without actually really knowing what those numbers mean. I read something really interesting the other day, and it said something along the lines of, you could be data-driven, but that doesn't mean you're data-informed. And I thought that was just, to me, that really resonated, and I think in a lot of cases that could be very true.
You just data drive right over the cliff. Yeah.
It's true.
Don't pay attention to the reality that's in front of you.
Yeah, as long as you're engaging with the data, you must be headed somewhere good, right?
Just keep looking down at your phone. You're not going to run into the street here.
Totally. No, I think a couple of things come to mind. One is you can draw qualitative conclusions from quantitative data. So it's not about just doing a different type of research. It's actually about having someone who understands human behavior look at and engage with the data. And I think the other thing is that there's always a role for the perfect user quote or a video of someone struggling to complete a task that brings the point home. I've personally used this in a number of projects in my past where the data, the sort of individual page or component level optimization data is telling us one thing, and then you actually see the user attempt to complete a task, and they give up after 30 minutes. Like, there's not a lot of arguing with the sort of visible frustration on the screen. So I think informing your audience with what's really going on with their users is sometimes more than the data, but can also be found in the data. It just requires appetite to engage with it. And I was really pleased to see the number of hands go up when you asked about how many people have access to the data. I bet you more people than the ones that raise their hands actually have access to the data. You might not be aware of it. You might not have, I don't know, made friends yet with your partners in product management or the data ops team or other parts of the organization, but the data is out there to engage with, and it's pretty rich in turning out what I think can be qualitative conclusions as well.
I do agree. However, I would argue sometimes because executives love data and statistical data, they will rely on it 100%, and they won't look at the qualitative, as you mentioned earlier, and because they don't know what the qualitative is going to add to it. If it's working,
Yep.
and it's significantly, high, they will rely on it. The problem is they're never going to know why the user is behaving the way they're behaving. A/B testing becoming a little bit more of, let's just quickly put two concepts and throw it out there and A/B test it. Problem is, 90% of the time, we don't know why A behaves better than B. We don't know even if A and B are built based on users, intent even. So we don't know why they're behaving that way. So qualitative is really crucial to your point earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
The two, combining the two, is powerful.
yeah, I think in qualitative research, maybe can sometimes be hard to be taken more seriously if you don't have that hard data, but then
To
the
back it up.
over-reliance on the hard data leaves you blind as to why.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's
And just
go ahead.
real quick on that, in either case, whether it's quant or qual, the data that you get back is only going to be as good as the questions that you're asking.
True.
And I think that that's really important. And I think understanding data and talk about like where's quant, do you know how to get to the quantitative data? That's one thing. But the more important piece of that is knowing what questions you're asking of the quantitative data, right? Because once you're asking the right questions, then you can figure out how to find.
Yeah, nothing's more true than asking questions of quantitative data and then really getting back more questions instead of answers.
Yeah.
So it's usually like 3 to 6 months. So those of you getting into data analysis, just know that the first couple months are pretty depressing and that you will get back into the part where you're getting value. Just keep going. So let's go to the audience. Got a great question here. In your experience, what's the best way to measure and demonstrate the value of design to non-design senior leaders? What are your most effective key metrics? Are they process metrics, the number of people, this and that? Is it metrics of the product, like revenue up, cost down? What are some key metrics you've used?
I would say task success completion.
Task success completion.
That's the number one metrics that will give you an indication that this design is working,
Yeah. I know a great platform where you can measure that.
right? Now, we do have many other metrics. I mean, we heard Richard also listing all the metrics, definitely.
Yeah,
And we know executives love NPS score, right? So sometimes you have to kind of
Right.
figure out how that task success impacting the NPS score. We have QX score, which is a combination of behavioral and attitudinal data as well. That also resonate very well because it incorporates the NPS score in it to know. And I think it's really important that you measure the performance of the design from a qualitative and quantitative as well, and the combination of the behavioral and attitudinal data so that you have better understanding of which tasks really need to be improved that tie to the bottom line, to the business KPI.
Like maybe your checkout process.
Yeah,
All right,
great
Fahad.
one.
I've always found more success in top-line metrics than bottom-line metrics. So, maybe it's just a slight variation in what you were talking about, but what I really love to go for is my default, if it's applicable in whatever context I'm in, is time to value, right? So, sometimes it is task completion,
Right.
but for our teams, it's also identifying which tasks are value-bearing.
Like time to value for me to complete it, like something I'm doing.
What's the value at the end of the task? So as opposed to just completing tasks and activities, but actually engaging in the discussion of which are the valuable tasks that we need to optimize, because you can identify an endless set of activities, tasks, jobs to be done in any given system.
Right.
And for a design team to actually engage with the conversation of which ones are the ones that have the most valuable to the goals of the company
Right.
is actually a really important part. Otherwise, you just sort of, you're firing blind on a number of things.
Totally. It
Yeah,
screw up your prioritization process, for sure.
Yeah, it just becomes such a target-rich environment that you feel like, well, I can always be optimizing any task, but if you can bring to the table these three are the most valuable because they help, let's say, complete the registration process. And registration is really important as opposed to updating my profile picture, right? Like one of these is a lot more valuable to the business than the other.
Yeah, I keep thinking login. Login is like this sort of like, I don't know, the left behind sibling there, where we're all just stuck trying to remember how to log in, and those few sites that have made it fast, I'm just so thankful.
Right.
So for those of you working on login, thank you. Okay, how do you regain executive trust in UX research after a research initiative failed to deliver on its promise? And this is why I always tell my teams, buy yourself some time before that sprint start date, because you may have a research project that does not validate. So yeah, how do you recover from this? How do you explain that? I mean, in Lean Startup, they talk about innovation accounting. Well, 15 years later, nobody uses the word innovation accounting. So Eric Ries failed in explaining it. How would you do it?
I mean, I think any discipline is prone to failure. Research is no different. I think failing fast and learning and figuring out what went wrong and pivoting and moving on to the next thing is the best way to get past it. I think if you look at it like we failed,
But
What do I-
as executives, like you're an executive, and this happens amongst your teams, and your fellow executives are thinking, well, Ryan's wasting all this time, he keeps failing. Like, what would you say to them to put you on the spot?
yeah, I'd be okay with that. I mean, I think,
But your buddies, like the head of sales or the other folks, I don't know. I feel like some other are non-design, people who aren't bought into this whole process.
again, I think it's fail fast and understand like what could you learn from the failure. Like failing is, I think, a lot of times people see it as a bad thing. It's negative. We lost. We failed.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think innovation, right, and the best ideas and the most successful products come because something failed along the way, and it probably failed multiple times. So I think as long as you recognize quickly that something failed and you're able to admit it and own up to it and look at it from the perspective of what went wrong, what can we learn from this, and how do we need to adapt or pivot and keep on moving forward, I honestly think that's the best way to gain that trust. It's just not dwelling on it. And
That's good. Well, we'll bring you into all of our rooms when we're explaining it. I love that.
I don't think it's a binary state of success or failure for a lot of these projects. I think you always learn something. You may not have learned or confirmed or validated whatever hypothesis you originally set out to, but there's always some interesting learnings out of these projects, and positioning those as value alongside with perhaps there's still an open switch on this question that we originally set out to solve is important, because otherwise, historically those will get reframed as this was wasted effort. And it wasn't wasted effort. It maybe failed to confirm or illuminate the hypothesis, but it probably gave you a lot of other interesting insights for alternative paths or for what you were looking for. I also think as long as you're failing in new and different ways each time, it's okay. It's just the problem is if you fail the same way each time. Right?
it's actually probably one of the safest ways to fail.
Yeah, exactly. The design phase, you didn't involve 3 engineers for
mean-
3 months, 10 engineers for 10 months.
If a checkout button doesn't work, that sucks. If you lose a deal in sales, you might not get that one back, right? If you fail during research, you have time to quickly recover from it.
Nice.
See, research is not that expensive.
Yes.
You gotta do all these experimentation. To Fahad's point, is like it's a data point. It's an important data point, and to your point, also, Ryan, it's better to fail at the design process versus failing when you launch the product. And then it's a disaster to recover from that afterwards. So have at that stage gate, moment where you're actually validating, and, I don't want to say validating. That's a bad word. Testing. Testing.
Illuminating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's better than.
All right, we're going to go to a spicy question here. I love this because I've been encountering this particular problem as just a consumer. What do you do when the business KPIs, revenue, conflict with the user needs, right? So this is, I was checking out at a hospitality website that shall not be named, and the cost of the hotel itself was, I don't know, $500 for whatever nights, and the cleaning fee was $465, shown to me in the last page. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not going to hit yes on that. So adding ads to the product, adding extra fees, it makes revenue, but it could be an anti-pattern. How do you, as leaders in these organizations, combat this desire to really squeeze?
I always think of the sort of influence vectors towards addressing user needs, user challenges as, well, there's OKRs, business metrics, and then there's user pain points. And if you're really lucky, there's a big overlap between those two, because theoretically, your OKRs should be about, well, the user is one path to success, and therefore we need to take care of them. There's probably some unaddressed, unoverlapped portion where the user needs or user pain points are outside of the OKRs. I try to look at those as a mining challenge. I could weave those back into the OKRs. I need to do a more effective job engaging in the discussion when the OKRs are being formed so that enough of those are being represented as business goals. And then I have to be intellectually honest about some subset of them are not going to be tied to business goals. And therefore, I have to question how much of that problem should I take on versus just say there's some unaddressed user needs that are not going to be important business problems. And we have to put them aside for now. Maybe we'll come back to them next year.
Let's do one final comment, and then we'll let folks get to lunch, if anybody has one.
I agree, go ahead.
I would ask questions. I think if you're a designer or a researcher, your job is to ask questions and try to understand why those are the KPIs you're shooting after, and maybe help executives figure out what problem they should be trying to solve. Maybe there's a problem of actually trying to address a problem that's slightly different than the problem you actually need to solve, and I think that's where a design and research team could also come in a useful way.
Yeah, if you have deposited that, credibility with the executive, you can have that conversation for sure. I
love depositing the credibility in order to withdraw when you need it.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yep.
All right, a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. You guys are great.